Hello, everybody. This is one and only Current Tony, and today we have a very special guest. Well, his name is Greg Suchy. He's a life coach, a speaker, a mentor, and the co-host of Addiction, Alcoholism, and the Three Principles. So, it's pleasure and honor. Let's welcome Greg Suchy. Hi, Greg. How are you today?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. So, Greg, without any further ado, I would like to ask you, what are the three principles and how do they work in our life?
Well, the three principles are at the core, they're the fundamental building blocks of human psychology and how we experience the world. Um, and there are plenty of explanations out there as far as breaking down, mind, consciousness, and thought individually. But the fact of the matter is, and even Sid talked about this quite a bit, even though there's technically three principles, they're really one. And if all that people really understood was just that everything we experience is experienced through our thinking, so that we are not ever experiencing what is happening around us, we're only experiencing our thinking about what's happening around us. If people really truly understood that at a deep level, that would really just change the world. It would change the way everybody interacts, because we all get caught up in our thinking from time to time. Even the people with the deepest understanding of the three principles from time to time are going to get caught up in their thinking and fall for it. That's just the way it works. The principles are simply explaining that that's how it works. It doesn't change how it works. It just makes it, to me, it made it a lot easier to accept those times when I did fall for it, and to be able to start taking it with a lighter feeling to it, just kind of laughing at myself when I catch myself falling for it, like, oh, I did it again, there it is. That's a sneaky one. But not beat myself up over it and not judge myself for it. That's the biggest difference that has changed for me, is just dropping that judgment around it, and not feeling like I have to be perfect just because I've got this understanding and I ran this addiction series, and it's like, no, I'm still gonna fall for it. And it- as time goes on, and my experiences deepen and my understanding deepens more and more and more, yeah, I spend less time falling for it, and I don't go in as deep. Things, I'm just taking it much more lightly. And it's really, to me, it's just more of that focus thing. Whereas if there's something in my life that I find unacceptable, if I focus on that thing, it's really going to stick around longer, because our energy, our thought energy, amplifies whatever we're thinking about. So if I'm thinking about things I don't want all the time, like, oh, I need to lose weight, well, that's usually when I really start struggling with what I'm eating. It's, and I don't, at this point, I'm fine with it, but this was a struggle for a lot of years for me. I've lost almost an entire person, or like really an entire person. I've lost about 120 pounds over the last 6, 7 years. And it, it didn't happen because I was focused on losing the weight. It happened because I began to focus on being healthy. And it doesn't seem like a huge difference there, but there's a really gigantic difference. Because and a big part of what I talk about with people with addiction issues is that it's simply a subconscious thought pattern. It's a habit. It's just something that we do over and over again, seemingly automatically, because it's subconscious. It's not something that we're necessarily aware of. But as soon as we're aware of it, we kind of see through it pretty quickly. But it doesn't mean we're like free from it. And the idea of just getting rid of a bad habit is actually one of the most misleading ideas in the self-help kind of, view and industry, because nature abhors a vacuum. So you can't just get rid of something. You have to replace it with something that you do want. So this whole process for me really has just been looking at where I'm putting my focus. Am I looking at what I don't want? Or am I taking that same energy and putting it toward building that mental habit that I do want? And from time to time, I'll slip back into that old pattern. And that's okay. It happens less often now, and I'm not in there as long as I used to be. But if I just focus on, oh man, I'm back in that place I don't want to be, then guess what? I'm putting more energy into that place I don't want. And it's just going to grow. Everywhere we put our energy grows exponentially too. So when I started, when I got into this understanding and really started looking at it and practicing it and kind of applying it, well, not really applying it, but just noticing it is really all it is. Noticing it in my life and how things function, it just really made life a lot easier because I didn't have to take everything so seriously. It wasn't a big deal because it's all fleeting, it's all temporary. At some point, that thought that popped up that made me feel depressed or angry or whatever is going to be replaced by another thought that makes me feel happy and joyful and fulfilled. And then at some point, it may be replaced again by another thought that makes me feel the way I don't like to feel. That's just the flow of life. It just, not taking it personally and not putting the energy into it is what helps keep that flow going. And allowing that, yeah, you know what, today maybe I'm just going to not be in the greatest mood. So what am I going to do with that? Am I going to be sad that I'm not in a great mood? Am I going to fight it? Or am I just going to accept it, allow it to be while it's there, and just go about my day as best I can? What I find is when I do that, it starts to fade, and next thing I know, a couple hours later, I'm not feeling that way anymore. Sometimes a couple seconds later, but we often don't notice that transition. And we've got these very short memory spans for patterns like that. All we know is that right now I feel like crap, so I should do something about it. I want to feel better. When we're feeling great, we just accept it, right? There's no fighting of it. When you're in a great mood and you're having a great time with really good friends and just enjoying yourself, you're not fighting it. You're not trying to figure out how you got there. But then when we feel the other way, we want to analyze it. We want to figure it out. We want to get rid of it. We want to set it on fire and just make it not exist anymore. Well, what if we just tried to find that same acceptance that we have for the joy and the happiness and the love? What if we look for that same acceptance? Because even joy and happiness are fleeting. Those are just other experiences that we have. It's all part of the whole. We're meant to have the full gamut of experiences. When a loved one dies, guess what? You're going to feel sad. You're going to feel some things that don't feel comfortable. But it's part of it. So if we learn to look at it with this acceptance, especially acceptance of self, showing ourselves love, especially in those moments when we're in those feelings we don't really particularly care for, that's the time to practice self-love. especially self-care. Do something for yourself that feels good, even if the feeling doesn't last, even if you got half of a millisecond of feeling okay in the midst of being horribly depressed. That's progress. That's pointing towards something. The fact that if I can stop and enjoy a nice cup of tea and maybe take a bath or something, and I feel better while I'm doing that, then later on afterward, I go back to feeling the other way I didn't like to feel. So what? Just accept it. Accept that that's what is in the moment, and it'll go away faster. That's kind of the beauty of it. It's like a noisy car driving by. You don't have to do anything to make it be quiet. You just wait and it'll go away. You don't have to go out and yell at the driver to fix their car. Because you know what that's going to do? It makes the car stop. And then that noise is there and it's not going to go away until you let that driver go. You know what I mean? There's that same type of thing happening in our minds. We get these thoughts we don't like, these loud thoughts, that loud car driving by. And rather than going, you know what, I didn't really do anything to make it show up, so perhaps I don't have to do anything to make it go away. Instead, we try to figure out how to shut the car up. And then we start working on these techniques on how to quiet down a noisy car that's driving by on the road. Well, guess what? You can't. It's not your car. It's not your noise. It's just noise. It's just a car. It's nothing personal. It just is. Allow it to be in that moment. And then when the moment comes when it's gone, allow that too. And I'm by no means perfect at this. I'm not claiming to, always live every moment in ecstasy. but what I can say is, even in those moments of having those feelings that I don't really particularly feel comfortable with, I'm still okay. I can still feel the sadness and the sorrow and remorse and regret and whatever else comes up, whatever it is in the moment. I'm in that place where I can allow that and still feel my well-being beneath it. And know, just like we've heard hundreds of times, people talk about, the sun is not affected by the weather. Big storm comes through and you can't see the sun, but you know it's still there. It's that same type of idea. It's like, I'm always well, no matter how I feel. There's already that well-being that exists. And I will naturally return to that when I stop entertaining the thoughts that took me away from it. That's all it ever is. We only ever get away from our true core being by our thinking. It's not the things that happen to us. It's not the things people say to us. It's what we think about those things. Not sure if I stayed on the question there.
Yeah, you did. You did. Exactly, that's what people do. They just play the game of thoughts, and they think the pain, the bad feelings, they're coming from something outside of them. But it's never that way. It's just the three principles in action, what they think, they feel. Also, would you like I tried to figure out the three principles logically, okay, and it didn't work out. I felt worse. So how would you like describe the three principles uh, in a way that they would look spiritual, not intellectual? I don't know if it makes sense, but
Yeah, I mean, because well, the only understanding of the three principles that matters is experiential understanding. The intellectual is not going to get you anywhere except more frustrated, because the intellectual would keep us judging. It'll keep us looking at right and wrong, good and bad, should and shouldn't, that kind of thing. And it's kind of like I like to compare it to a pendulum. You know, you think a pendulum that has not been influenced by outside sources sits still for the most part. There might be some very slight movement, but it generally stays still. But then we as humans have this idea that there must be, we're supposed to be happy and joyful all the time or something. You know, people generally have that kind of idea. And what that's doing is that's kind of like pushing the pendulum in one direction, saying, I just want to be happy. So I'm just going to push it over here into happiness. Well, the problem is nothing's permanent. Nothing is sustainable like that. So anytime you're chasing after happiness and pushing that pendulum in that direction, eventually it has to swing back in the other direction, because nature has that way of balancing things out. So when we push it one way, it's going to swing the other way. So if we're chasing happiness, we're more likely to have those periods of unhappiness. Whereas if what we do is allow contentment to be and allow that pendulum to just be, then happiness and joy are just naturally occurring things. We don't have to chase them. You know, they happen anyway. Think about, you know, you're driving along and you come through some trees or past some buildings and suddenly there's a beautiful sunset. And whatever you were just thinking about is gone. Your worries for the day, your troubles that you've had, your financial issues, whatever it is, it's all gone in that moment, isn't it? That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm pointing toward, is that we're already there. We're already where we want to be. It's just that we have these societal expectations and these ideas that have been given to us throughout our lives that we're supposed to be something else, that it's not okay to just be contented. We have to be happy. It's not okay to, you know, live a you know, financially comfortable life. We have to be rich. We have to have that bigger house, that faster, shinier car, that boat, that airplane, that whatever, you know. And it's those types of things that tend to pull us away from that center of well-being. It's just another direction that we're pushing that pendulum and not allowing ourselves to just be. Because what being is a combination of everything. We're already joyful and happy, but we're also sad, and we're also, you know, we also have all these other things that happen that just show up. And if we don't label them, if we don't judge them, if we don't make them right or wrong, it just makes things a whole lot more enjoyable. You know, the intellectual understanding of the principles is very simple: mind, consciousness, and thought. I mean, it's like, and we all have preconceived ideas of what those words mean, which is why it's kind of a problem. So then we have to get into, well, how do I explain what mind is and thought and consciousness? You know, thought, we're not talking about the content of our thinking, we're talking about just the ability to think. Just the fact that everything is thought. You know, so but even that means different things to different people. But when we just spend time being present with somebody, there's an energy that's exchanged. I mean, there's always energy being exchanged, but there's a more natural flow of that neutral contentment kind of energy. And people can feel that. And a lot of times people feel uncomfortable with it because they're so used to things being to an extreme of swinging that pendulum. So when we meet somebody who's got that pendulum kind of not swaying so much, it's kind of sitting more toward the middle in that contentment place, a lot of times we feel really called to talk to them. We feel called to just be in their presence. And that's where some of the value of coaching comes in. And coaching doesn't have to be paid by any means. And it certainly does not have to be a, $10,000 package or whatever. But just spending some time being present with somebody who's in that space is enough to allow us to experience it for ourselves. And if we're truly open, if we're not going into it being too skeptical, I mean, we should be somewhat skeptical anytime we check out something new, but not to the point where we're totally closed off to learning from it. So if we go into it with that open mind and just looking to have that experience and not to come out of it with an understanding, but with an experience, that's what makes all the difference. Because you already are the three principles. They're already working in your life. You're already using them just like anybody else. So it's just a matter of noticing how they're working. And just observation, it's so, see, words don't cover this. Words don't touch it. They kind of point in the direction, but they never actually get there. So if you're stuck in the intellectual understanding, you'll never actually truly understand it. You might be able to explain it very well, in a way. You can spout off words that point in that direction, but until you stop paying attention to the words and look in that direction, you'll never actually get it. It's like the Buddhist saying about the finger pointing at the moon. If you're always looking at the finger, you're never going to see the moon. But once you see the moon, you no longer need the finger, and you instead become one. And I'm paraphrasing. That's not a that's not a direct quote or anything, but that's my understanding of that. And it's like once you move past, because the finger is the intellectual understanding, and the moon is the spiritual. And once you've had that spiritual experience of the understanding, you no longer desire the intellectual understanding. It's just not useful. But when you're first learning to look for the moon, it's pretty helpful to have that finger pointing at it. I hope that makes sense.
It does. It does make sense. Beautiful. Beautiful. This is what I was trying, trying to just to read books and make sense of those three principles. It is not something that you can describe in words. It is something that you have to experience, right?
Right.
Exactly. So,
Well, it's no different than I can explain a certain type of food to you. I can talk to you all day long about what this food tastes like and smells like and the texture of it and how it makes me feel. But until you eat that food, you're never going to understand it.
exactly. Exactly.
It's important to have the conversations, but the conversations aren't important. The experience is what's important. You can watch people doing fun things on TV all day long, but until you go out and do those things, you're not having fun.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's really what this is about. Go experience life. And that's what Sid talked about. He wasn't telling people if you get this understanding, you should be a coach and you should help as many people as possible. He said, once you get this, go live your life. Just go be you. And just by being you, you will influence other people. Just being in Sid's presence changed people's lives. He didn't even have to explain anything. There were people who woke up just by being near him, just because he was in that space. It's similar to, like, have you heard about like if you have multiple tuning forks and in proximity to each other and you strike one of them, the other ones will start vibrating at the same frequency?
Yes.
It's the same way with that pendulum. If you're one of those people who's always got your pendulum swinging and you come across somebody who's in that more neutral space, your pendulum has this way of kind of finding more of that neutral space just by being in the presence. As long as the other person isn't easily swayed. I mean, you think about that word sway. We say that, we're easily swayed. Well, you're swaying that pendulum, you're moving it. So if I'm comfortable with that neutrality, with that contentment, then other people aren't going to sway my pendulum. Instead, my pendulum is going to influence theirs to stop swaying. My tuning fork is going to start resonating with their tuning fork. It's all energy. We've got this this thing we call science that unfortunately has divided everything and made everything not one. And the funniest thing about it is the farther they get and the more advanced they get, the more they're realizing that it is all one. That everything that they've been looking at all these years, dividing it all up, is actually incorrect. But unfortunately, people have bought into that scientific mind frame. And so then we're different from each other. I can look at you, you look differently than me, you speak differently than me, you live differently than me in some ways, and I can look at that and I can go, well, you're wrong. Or I can look at that and go, wow, that's fascinating. And maybe I'll start living some ways that you live, and I'll start incorporating some of that into my life, and you'll start incorporating some of my things into yours. And then we can all kind of, it's not about all becoming the same. It's about when we're exposed to different ideas and different ways of doing things, we may find a way that we like better. Something that resonates more with ourselves, rather than sticking with something that isn't quite working just because that's what we've always been told should be. So that open-mindedness, the willingness to have whatever experience life is going to bring to us, to have that conversation with somebody who's nothing like you, and to go into it without judgment, without trying to say, well, this person's wrong and I'm going to try to convince them that they should live like me. We have entire religions built on that idea that they have to go out and basically force other people to believe what they believe. But it's like, to me, if what you believe is absolute truth, then there's no need to convince anybody of anything.
Exactly.
You should just live it, just be it. And just by being it, people will sense that. They'll sense your peace of mind, they'll sense your happiness, and they'll get curious. And I've actually gotten in trouble at work because there would be a stressful situation and I'm completely calm and everybody else is going with the flow of the stressful thinking. And I'm just calm and trying to just focus on figuring out the solution rather than freaking out about the problem. And I've been told that I don't take my job seriously enough because I don't get stressed out. But it's just, it's kind of mind-boggling to me that that's the direction the world chose to take at some point. To believe that we should feel stress and anxiety and anger and whatever at certain situations. That somehow that outside circumstance should produce the exact same inside experience for every person. And yet there's so much evidence that that isn't even true. I mean, go to any any movie theater or go anywhere where somebody just watched an opera or whatever, a classical music concert, and you talk to all the people who were there, and you will get so many different views of how that show went. You'll have some people who really enjoyed it and some people who didn't, some people who thought that they should have had more of this or less of that, and just there's always going to be all these varying opinions on how things should or shouldn't be. And that's perfectly fine. That's always going to be there. Our biggest issue as a society is that we feel like there's only one correct way, even though all the evidence points otherwise. Everybody should act the same way. Everybody should be happy working that 40-hour work week. Everybody should be happy with, as long as you have a roof over your head and food on your table, you should be happy. Well, there's plenty of people who don't have a roof over their head and don't have consistent food, and they're pretty happy. It's not about the things. It's not about the outside stuff. You look at Viktor Frankl, A Man's Search for Meaning. I mean, to be in a concentration camp during the Holocaust and grow from it rather than shrink, that's pretty incredible. And he's no special person. He was just somebody who was more present. He was somebody with his pendulum not swinging quite so hard. We're all capable of that. We're all capable of going through any experience unscathed, unharmed.
Beautiful.
Life really is a beautiful thing.
It is. Yes. All right. Okay. And I would also like to ask you about addiction. What is addiction and how can people overcome it?
Okay. So addiction is self-made, first of all. It is not a disease. It is not something that we've physically inherited. Mentally, yes, because we learn a lot of our habits and thought patterns and stuff from our parents and families and friends and stuff growing up. So generally speaking, addiction forms because we want to feel better than we feel. It doesn't necessarily mean we're feeling bad. For a lot of people, it is that. I'm depressed, so if I go get high, I feel better. But for some people, it's I already feel good, and if I go get drunk, I'll feel even better. It'll just be that much more of a fun night or whatever. But it always comes down to wanting to feel better than we feel. And at first, it's this conscious choice of, yeah, I'm going to go get drunk tonight with my buddies and have a good time. But after we do that so many times, our brains, our computer is very efficient at picking up on patterns. And not only picking up on patterns, but predicting when those patterns are going to happen. So what starts happening is that first conscious aware pattern suddenly starts to become this somewhat automatic thing. And the brain starts predicting when we might be feeling ways we don't really want to feel. And that's when we kind of start reaching out for that drink or drug before we're in that place where we feel like it's useful. And all it really is just a thought pattern that we've practiced enough times that our computer decided that it was going to write a program for it and just keep running that program over and over again. So it looks like it's out of our control, which is where the whole idea of a disease comes from. And this thought that addiction and alcoholism and whatever, which are all the same, but that they're somehow out of our control and incurable and we're stuck with it. And the only option is complete abstinence. Well, avoidance of an issue is not the same as solving an issue. because all you're doing is you're taking away a coping mechanism and not solving the issue that it was being used to solve in the first place. And that's why we'll see a lot of people, maybe they'll quit drinking, but now suddenly, like this one thing that happened for me when I ended up in AA. Yeah, I quit drinking, I quit getting high, but then I was drinking coffee like it was a necessary thing. I was drinking, a gallon or two of coffee every day. I started smoking even more cigarettes, and I just traded addictions because I hadn't solved the core issue. All I was trying to do was cover up symptoms, which is what Western medicine is really good at, is trying to cover up symptoms, but not actually getting to the root cause, which is why chronic conditions tend not to be resolved in in Western medicine. So and we touched on it earlier, the true answer is simply to create new patterns, new habits. And while we're creating those new habits and patterns, we're likely to sometimes fall back into the old ones. We call that relapse. And then we make it something bad, something shameful. It's like, oh, you shouldn't have done that. Like my time in AA, I saw so many people who'd go out and have a couple drinks or something, and then they wouldn't want to come back, because when they came back, they'd have to reintroduce themselves and start all over. And it was like this shameful process. Whereas if we just understood that all it is that old habit popping back up, and there's nothing we have to do about it except just look back in the direction of our new habit of what we want, which is really the key, that would really help so many people, because you can't fight what's there without keeping it there. If you and I actually wanted to get in a physical fight, we'd have to be in the same room, right? And as long as we're fighting, we're both going to be there. There's no way around that. As long as you're fighting something, you're keeping it there. But if you instead use that same energy to create something new, the problem will solve itself. And eventually your old habits and patterns won't be something that you go back to. It'll start fading as the new habit becomes stronger. As you put that energy into what you want rather than fighting what you don't want, you end up with more of what you want. And it really is that simple, which doesn't necessarily make it easy. It can still take some effort, and it still takes some more of effort of just being aware, of just noticing what's there, of just understanding that is what's happening, that these principles are in action all the time. And what we think about and what we give our energy to is what is going to manifest in our lives. That's what our experience is made out of. Addiction is not a hopeless condition by any means. Neither is mental illness, what we call mental illness anyway, because it's the exact same thing. It is a subconscious thought pattern. There was some kind of coping mechanism that person found useful at some time. If you're if you're being physically abused, learning how to dissociate from your body is a very useful thing, because in that moment you can go into your own little inner world and maybe not feel as much of that physical pain. But later on in life, when you're no longer being physically molested or abused, but still practicing the same habits, it suddenly becomes an issue, and we call it a mental illness. But it's not a mental illness, it is a mental habit, it is a mental thought pattern. And it can be adjusted and changed just like anything else. Just like if you don't like the way your house looks, you can paint it and redecorate it, right? You don't just sit in your house and go, man, I wish I had more colors in here. Which I do every time I come in this room, by the way. I keep thinking about painting it. I never seem to get around to it, but we can do that. Just sit in that same room and stare at the wall that we don't like the color of. or we can start painting it. And you know what? Sometimes when we start painting it, especially if we're not experienced painters, the paint may not fully cover the old color, especially if it was a really bold color. And it may take a couple layers. We may have to use a primer. We may have to, you know what I mean? We may have to just allow the process to be the process and understand that sometimes the old paint may show through when you're repainting the room, and you may need to do another coat. And it can be, laborsome and time consuming at times. But if you want that new color on the wall, you got to keep painting it. If you paint it once and it doesn't quite give you what you want, and then you just sit there and go, oh, well, I tried, you're still stuck with something you don't want. But if you try it out and it's not quite what you want, try something else. Just keep trying it. Keep trying something else. Try another new pattern, another new habit. And some of the things that I've done is like I got back into woodworking. I found where I like, the type of woodworking I like to do. I love playing music and singing. I like photography. I go camping. I go backpacking and kayaking, and like all of these things are the new patterns, the new things that I would rather be doing. And that's really what the process is about. You find the things that you actually want in your life and pursue them to the best of your abilities. I mean, do you really think I was great at woodworking when I started? No. I'm still not great. I'm good. I can make things that come out right and look good, but I'm not somebody who's been doing it for 40 years and has all the techniques down. But that's not going to stop me from doing it. And it shouldn't stop anybody else from trying to better their lives and get, move past the old patterns that they don't find useful anymore. Even though building the new ones can be frustrating and difficult at times. Just keep moving forward. Keep trying that. The day will come when you will wake up and suddenly that new pattern will be the one. And you won't go back to the old one. That day will come. In the meantime, enjoy the moments when you're in the new pattern. And you know what? Enjoy the moments when you're in the old pattern too. That's kind of the key, because if you're beating yourself up over stuff, then you're making yourself feel worse, which is why we had those patterns in the first place, was to feel better. But if we just allow ourselves to feel better and to experience that innate well-being that's already within us, then we no longer need those old patterns. Like Joe Bailey in his book, The Serenity Principle, the big thing that really stuck with me in that book was when he said that serenity is our natural state of being when we stop doing the things that take us away from it. And I found that to be absolutely true through my experience. We just return to that state of happiness and well-being, and it just happens naturally.
Beautiful, beautiful. I would like to ask you, if somebody has a porn addiction, if they like to porn, if they like to watch porn, so what habits can they replace it with?
Anything. I mean, it's not, there's nothing to really prescribe for it.
Mhm.
What do you like doing? That's the thing. What is it? And I went through quite a few years of porn addiction too. And I have to say that it never satisfied me, ever. It seemed to kind of in the moment, but then afterward you feel kind of like you did something that wasn't quite good for you, kind of thing, you know? It, so what makes you feel good? And it's going to be different for each person. You know, try different things. Go take a painting class. See if you like painting. Well, don't take one, take a few. You know, when you try something new, try it for a little bit. Give yourself some time to get past that new person stage where you're terrible at it. You know, because that's not always enjoyable when you're still terrible at things. But go take, you know, half a dozen painting classes and see, is this something that I feel like I enjoy? If it is, keep taking the classes. If it doesn't, go take a different class somewhere or something else. Go get into yoga. Go for a walk in the woods. Get a, you know, get a carving knife and a piece of wood and go carve something out of it. Your first one's going to look horrible, and you're probably going to cut your fingers a bunch of times as you learn the techniques. I know that personally. But eventually you will find something that really sparks your interest and really fulfills you. And you'll never find that if you're spending all of your time sitting there in front of the computer looking at porn. Now, in the meantime, when you do go back to looking at porn, allow yourself to look at it. And while you're looking at it, enjoy it to the best of your abilities while you're looking at it. But then when you're done, go back to building that new pattern and finding that new activity that fulfills you. There's an infinite number of possibilities out there for things that we could do. Just go try stuff. That's really the best advice I could give. Because there's no difference between porn and alcohol and drugs and, like I said, what we call mental illness. There's no difference in any of that stuff. The core issue is the exact same. And the answer is the same. Create a new pattern. It's not necessarily going to happen overnight, although, you know, we are capable of that. We're capable of waking up in an instant and no longer falling for any of the stuff. How likely it is just depends on how willing we are to let go of the story that we've created about ourselves, about who I am. You know, how many times have we heard people say, "Oh, I've been this way my whole life. It's just who I am." Well, if you believe that, then it's true. But it's not actually true. It's just true for you. As long as you hold on to that mentality of this is who I am, then that's who you're going to be.
Beautiful. Would you also talk more about thought and its nature in life?
Yeah. See, thought, and this is where the intellectual side gets kind of tricky, because we're not talking about what people would normally think of with thought, which is about the content of our thinking. We're talking about thought in a broader sense, because thought exists everywhere, in every moment, in everything, in everyone. There's this constant flow to thought. And not every thought that pops into our heads is really ours. In fact, none of them are until we claim them. And we train ourselves to look for certain thoughts, and it's subconscious. You know, it's not something that we're usually aware of, but that's really what experiencing this is about versus the intellectual thing, is that you start to see how these things are working in our lives. So there's this constant flow of thought, and every possibility exists in every moment, but we've trained ourselves to only look for certain ones. So if I am generally a depressed person, then when a depressing thought comes through, I'm more likely to give it energy. I'm more likely to claim it for mine. That's my thought. I'm a depressed person. And we all know people like this. And they'll even walk around saying, oh, I'm just a depressed person. They've thoroughly bought into that idea. But if instead we look at that same person, the same habits, the same depression, and go, I'm not a depressed person. I am a person who just tends to entertain depressing thoughts. But instead, I'm going to start giving less energy to those thoughts and more energy to some thoughts that I'd rather have. What we're going to find, first of all, that happens when we try to change it is those depressive thoughts will seem to be much more prevalent. They'll seem to be everywhere as we're trying to not see those. You know what I mean? So that's the importance of choosing something you'd rather see rather than trying to get rid of what you don't want. Because if you just don't want to think depressive thoughts anymore, then you're more likely to recognize those depressive thoughts and give them energy. Whereas if you say, I would rather have, and don't feel like you have to jump to like ecstasy. Like I've been this depressed person for 40 years and now suddenly tomorrow I'm just going to wake up and be ecstatic all the time. It's possible. Have that, have that as a goal eventually. But let's take some steps. Because it's much more difficult to reach for a happy thought when you're depressed. But if I'm really depressed and I find another depressing thought that isn't quite as depressing, isn't that an improvement? And then from that place, I can reach for a thought that's just a little bit less depressing again. And then eventually I'm kind of getting more toward the neutral thoughts. And I can choose one that's just a little bit better than where I am. And start that progress, that momentum in that direction where we want to go, and keep looking for the next better thought. It's not about creating it because all the thoughts are already there right now in this moment. Every single thought that you could possibly have is already here in this moment. But it's no different than, like, you look at like our eyesight is very limited compared to a lot of other animals. There's plenty of animals who have night vision, or they see, in what we consider to be invisible light spectrums, like ultraviolet light and stuff like that. So there's all this stuff around us that we can't even see physically. We're surrounded by ultraviolet light, and yet we can't see it. We're surrounded by all of these thoughts. We can't see them all. We only see the ones we're used to seeing. But the difference between like our eyesight and our thinking, that our eyesight is what it is. I'm not going to be able to change my eyes so that they can perceive ultraviolet light. It's just not going to happen. I can use contraptions, I can use devices to pick up on it and put it into a visible spectrum, but you're still not actually seeing ultraviolet light. You're seeing the non-ultraviolet interpretation of the ultraviolet light. Whereas with our thinking, we can actually perceive more than what we perceive in like the spiritual aspect of seeing that ultraviolet light. We can see that there's always another choice for another thought that we don't have to create. They already exist. It's just a matter of that observation, that noticing thing. That's why that's so important, to take that time to be quiet and just observe. Just simply notice what is. No judgment, no labeling, just notice. When you start to notice and really just pay attention to what's happening in the moment, you start to notice that there's other things going on too. It's not just about this fine line that we've created for ourselves that keeps leading us down this path of depression or addiction or whatever kind of behaviors we don't like, whatever kind of habits we have that we don't like. That's only one possibility out of everything that exists. And it all exists right here, right now, in the moment. And the more in the moment we learn to be, the more we have access to, or not quite right, the more we allow the other things that already exist to be a part of our experience. And that's when things get really interesting, really just fascinating. Life is incredible. Like I said, I'm not perfect at this. I don't spend all of my time in this place of, always peace and calm and bliss and ecstasy, but I spend a whole lot more there now than I ever used to. And I don't take the other times quite so seriously anymore. Yeah, they can feel pretty horrible in the moment while you're going through depression or anxiety or whatever it is that you deal with on a pretty consistent basis. But it doesn't have to, the effects from it don't have to stick around. They don't have to last any longer than that experience lasted. Because we each have our own story. We have a story that we've created. It's the story of me. And it's what determines what I generally tend to experience in life, what I tend to see. It's like I've chosen my own pair of glasses, and it's limiting my vision. I can only see a certain spectrum of light, and I'm missing all the other spectrums. But if I learn to take those glasses off and just notice the other spectrums, eventually I'm going to find one that seems a bit more attractive. Another thought pattern. Build a new one. Find things you love doing. Practice self-care. That is such an enormous part of this whole process, is practicing self-love and self-care. And realizing that that is not selfish. And unless we take care of ourselves, we really can't be there for other people in the way that we want to be. It's, and I know it's been kind of overused, but like the oxygen mask thing on an airplane, if you don't put yours on first, you're not going to be quite as useful to the people around you. If you're not really truly breathing, if you're not really truly living, how can you help another person to live and breathe?
Exactly. We just cannot give what we don't have.
Yeah.
Great. All right, Greg. It has been a great time with you. I'll talk to you, and I want to thank you very much for this interview. I'll end this recording, and then I'll talk to you more. Greg, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.